Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Charles Collingwood. He has a PhD. He's a STEM educator who has worked in the K-12 system for over 25 years. Before becoming an educator, he worked as an agricultural research scientist at the University of Virgin Islands Agricultural Experiment Station. He graduated from the University of Hawaii with degrees in agriculture, mechanization, and agriculture and resources economics. After moving to Tucson, he attended the University of Arizona, earning a master's degree in teaching and learning mathematics and a doctorate degree in leadership and policy. He currently is a chairman of the mathematics department at Suhuaro High School, an adjunct faculty in the mathematics department at Mesa Community College, and a data science and STEM fellow at the University of Arizona. His passion is addressing the vexing issue that exists as it relates to the underrepresentation of minority students in the STEM fields. With that said, welcome Dr. Charles Collingwood.
Yeah.
The panelists.
Hey, that was really, is that me, really? Is that me?
Wow.
Surprised that's me, but it is. Thank you very much. This is an amazing opportunity today to get a chance to really speak on some issues that is really dear to me and so dear to everyone on the panel right now. And what I would like to do right now, though, is have each panelist kind of talk a little bit about themselves, so we have some good ideas going forward as far as who we are talking to. Let's start with Andre.
Hello, my name is Louis Andre Brownlee, but I go by my middle name, Andre. Actually, Charles and I were in the same doctoral program down there at U of A. Currently, I am a professor in education studies at Mesa Community College, where I teach foundational education courses, but also I work with our STEM faculty, and I do STEM development with the Mesa public school systems. And so I'm actually leading an initiative called Full Steam Ahead, where I take pre-service teachers that share the same cultural markers as the students within Mesa Public Schools, and we do culture relevant STEAM activities in the classrooms and try to have students consider going into the STEAM field, not just for the money aspect, but also to see the heroes and sheroes in the field that look like them, historically and locally. I'm glad to be here. So thanks for inviting me, Charles.
Thank you, Renee. And Renee again, Renee squared.
Am I up, Dr. C? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right, good almost afternoon, everyone. Rene Martinez. I am currently an assistant principal. Official title is assistant principal for student success in the Phoenix Union High School District at Maryvale High School. And in this role, I support we're lucky enough in our district to have a lot of supports rallied around students in that we have 2 social workers, 2 community liaisons, 3 student liaisons, a student success coordinator, a student study facilitator, a behavior interventionist, student prevention intervention. So there's just a lot of supports rallying around our students here. And that's kind of the area that I support here on our campus. Prior to that, I was an assistant principal at a middle school at a neighboring district. But as a teacher, I began my teaching career for the Tucson Unified School District in the Ethnic Studies Department, specifically the Mexican American Studies Department. And it was in that journey that I had the privilege to get to know Dr. Collingwood, in that I was one of those teachers who would go from classroom to classroom during teachers prep period. And it was an honor to be able to stop to use Dr. Collingwood's classroom during his prep period. And that was back in 2005, 2006, I believe. And the before, even the during, the after conversations, we got a chance to chop it up and talk shop, and been in contact with Dr. Collingwood, and have been privileged to have some very dynamic conversations and done some good work along the way with Dr. Collingwood. So a privilege and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Blaise Cross.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Blaise Cross, and I currently teach math at Bisbee High School. This is my 18th year in the classroom, and I've had the privilege of working in Cochise County, different public schools within Cochise County for those years. And I'm proud to say that I'm actually from Cochise County. I consider myself homegrown. And the reason I think I've stuck around so long, you know, we always leave and we come back, it calls you back. And so I feel that I have a calling to, it's almost leading students to something they didn't even know they were capable of doing. Because especially in rural Arizona, rural America, it's very hard to fill math positions and highly qualified positions, especially in the STEM field. And so we have those discussions all the time that, you know, yes, we're close to the border and we have a challenge ahead of us, but let's not let that stop anything. So I've worked with different initiatives, especially since 2015, gathering data and showing that there's a need right here in Cochise County so that we can get the funding necessary to move things forward. So thank you, Charles, for having me. And I'm very pleased to be a part of this group. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Blaise. Next, my brother, Kevin Cuff.
Hello and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I'm a science education specialist based at UC Berkeley's Lawrence Hall of Science, and I lead a research group that designs and studies STEM programming models. And the models that we design and study are mainly those that are designed particularly with youth of color in urban settings in mind. So thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
All right. Dr. Martinez.
Good morning, Dr. Dave Martinez, principal of Early College High School, based in Costa Mesa and part of the Newport Mesa Unified School District. We are a dual enrollment high school whose college partner is Coastline College. I've been at the school now in my 7th year. I've been in education for 30 years, started off as a math teacher of 11 years before I went into administration. And since I've been at Early College High School, I've been able to work with educators at my site in my district to resurrect the Mesa program at our school, which stands for Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement, not as a club as it once was before I arrived there, but now as a curriculum, pathway curriculum that students can access while they're at Early College High School. We're also in conversations with the college to bring in courses in information and communication technology. So I'm at a school where it's very high socioeconomically disadvantaged students. We're a Title I school. So the purpose and the mission is really to raise the awareness and the accessibility of underrepresented populations. And not only for college, but also we're really increasing the visibility of STEM opportunities that exist in Southern California. Thank you.
Wow, it's a powerful panel. Really appreciate that. And last, Dr. Dave.
Hey, you know, I am the imposter here. I don't work formally in an educational capacity at a school, but I am a citizen, an entrepreneur who developed a program called 5 Saturdays, really focused on vocational capabilities for high school students. The partner with Dr. Martinez when I lived in Southern California, 2 different schools at Estancia and Early College High School. He was kind enough to, or brave enough, I should say, to allow me to bring a bunch of industry professional onto his campus during the summer and to teach them things of software development, agile practices, entrepreneurship, job readiness, which is a career development aspect of things. So we've he's been kind enough to do that. And also with Dr. Charles Collingwood, he's been kind enough to allow me to come onto his campus, or I'd bring some of those capabilities also to Tucson, Arizona. And so we run a summer program where we're trying to bring, what I say, real world vocational skills to students now, because we realize that not everyone's going to go to college, and not everyone will have the opportunity to attend someplace like early college, high school, to be able to get college credits and to move forward. So how can we as professionals in our fields bring those skills to the educators and allow them to leverage these skills and bring them to the students early? I am a recipient of those students when I'm hiring people, and I see, the journey that they've came through and the knowledge that they have. And sometimes it's lacking these basic skills. We're living in a VUCA time where we need technology skills and other soft skills that students learn. So we're always excited to see when we meet someone we focus on 13 to 19-year-olds. So it's interesting to see when we meet a 13-year-old coming out of 8th grade into 9th grade and see what they look like after going through a 7-week program. So this is important to me, that we bring and spotlight and highlight educators who are doing things in a very agile way for our students in our community. So I'm glad that I could hang out with you smart people.
Okay, I'll take that. I know I try to send out the agenda to quite a few of you guys, but I'm going to share my screen. So the approach that I want to take with this discussion is kind of look at the implications of education, and which I hope will drive the topic of how we do what we do and why we need to do what we do better, right? So let me just share my screen. I need to get permission to share my screen. I don't have. Oh yeah, okay, now I got it. Let's see. Go back code. Give me a second. Okay.
If you need, I could, be your producer and bring up the presentation for you, B. You want me to do that?
You're my producer, huh?
Yeah, share it for you. There you go. You got it.
Yeah. Feel like we're in a reggae band or something, right? Okay.
You know how it goes.
So here we go. Hey, thanks again, man. I really appreciate we having this discussion. I think it will be a powerful discussion. And basically, if we look here, we could see the kind of things that we're going to talk about, right? So I have really 4 questions that I want us to dive into and really just be authentic in your perspective, right? We're all here to learn and to change things as we can. So let's kind of, there's only one love in this room, right? There's no issues here. So let's kind of take that in mind as we continue this work. So there are 4 questions we want to talk about. One of them is, what are the main concerns in the current K-12 education system? Then what are some of the tools and resources that can be used to address the disparity in education outcomes for underrepresented minority students? And based on the research, what should teaching and learning in the 21st century look like? And how do we fully prepare all students to compete in the 4th industrial revolution? So that's the essence of what we're going to talk about in this session. But to do that, what I did, and I think I have consulted with some people, and I think it's pretty powerful, is that I want to look to see where we are right now as a community, and as especially people who are underrepresented in the education system. And so here, as you look at this first slide, we'll try to let this be the framework by which we can make our discussion, right? So if we look here at the ratio of proportion and poverty related to population and race and age, right? And it's clear that people who are not white are not doing as well. I mean, are overrepresented in poverty, right? We could see that, right? And this is data from the Census Bureau in 2020, right? So this is brand new data. It's not like 50 years ago. It's current. And we could see how minority people are overrepresented in the poverty based on their population in the US. So that's one thing we want to keep in mind. The next slide is about median household income from 2008 to 2019. And again, you could see what's happening, right? You could see, I mean, it's clear, we don't need to even delve into it, but you could see what I'm talking about, how median income is definitely different for people who are minoritized people. So that's one thing. And then these are the discussion problems that we're going to have, right? But I just want to kind of run through it really quickly, and then we come back, right? We revisit. Now, this I think is one of my favorite slide that I talk to my students about all the time, right? Income and education. Okay, so there's a correlation between income and education, but more importantly, like I was talking to one of my brothers this morning, is that there are two types of education. Is informal education and a formal education, right? So sometimes when we talk about education and income, we really talk about the education, but we need to also address the issues with the informal education, okay? And then of course, this kind of speaks to what's happening because education drives income eventually. And understanding this, it will really let you understand that the job that we're doing right now is extremely important, okay? So, and of course, race and ethnicity and so forth. So let's go back to the questions, right? And what I would like is that we start, we start with each panel member, and then they could ask questions or discuss what are their main concerns of the current K-12 education system. So let's start with like Dr. Brownlee.
You know what, this is a real good question. And when I read it, I thought about it from many different lenses. And so to me, one of the main concerns in the current 12 education, I would say it's two, is our teacher pre-service programs. And I will also talk about funding. What we see is in our teacher pre-service programs that, which the area that I work in, is a lot of times our students that come to our programs are not culturally aware of the student population that they're actually going to teach, right? They're not aware of poverty. They don't understand poverty and what that means. So 80-something% of all school teachers are white female, and 70% of those students come from non-diverse backgrounds. And so they're going into Title I schools, they're going into very diverse schools, and they don't have the tools to be able to reach those students. So there are explicit and implicit biases concerning poverty, race, ability, impacts the way that they teach, right? And the data constantly shows us that the impact of just having one Black teacher in a classroom benefits Black and non-Black students as well. And also I would talk about this archaic way of funding public schools, right? That's based on property taxes, right? And so Jonathan Kozol, who wrote the textbook Savage Inequalities, points out that the way that funding is set up is to keep affluent schools affluent and to keep poor schools poor. And so we have this systemic problem that's there. And so we got to definitely talk about funding. We got to talk about empowering teachers financially so it makes the career more attractive, right, for people to actually think about teaching. But if you're going to graduate from a teacher pre-service program, A, not equipped to teach the student population that you have in front of you, and then B, you have more student loan debt that you can carry to going up to a profession that might start off at $40,000, a lot of people are not going to choose that pathway. And so when I talk to my students, we talk about culture relevant teaching, culture responsive teaching. I might touch on critical race theory, but we do talk about the impact of poverty, of how it's difficult to learn when you're hungry, how it's difficult to learn when you don't feel safe. And if you're not able to reach with those students, then that's going to cause the issue. And we see this systemically happen over and over and over, especially for many of us who actually taught in K-12. I taught in K-12 for 8 years. And so those are the things I constantly see as an issue. And so in my classrooms, we talk about poverty, right? And we talk about immigration. And we talk about these difficult topics because these are main concerns within our current K-12 education. I mean, you can write a dissertation just on this question by itself, or even a book, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a very weighty topic, but I'm going to digress and leave the floor open for someone else to make some comments.
Can we hear from Blaise Cross?
So the main concerns from my personal lens is something that Dr. Brownlee just spoke to, and it's the I'm just going to say it, the unfair situation that students are put in when they have a special category based on race, based on, you know, their financial status or where they live. And so what I find is, being within walking distance to the Mexican border, I have a very high population of minority students, predominantly Hispanic, Spanish speakers. And so I don't know that the traditional model that's being used to support public education truly understands the challenges that come when poverty is 97% free and reduced lunch, right? And these numbers, it's interesting. I was able to crunch some numbers with Dr. Collingwood, and I actually was troubled by the fact that the local numbers that I was able to come with, and the numbers he brought from the the Census Bureau, they were just so very different. And so when you really look at how people are making these decisions based on funding, see, it's all connected, follow the money. It's very difficult when the true urgency or the true crisis isn't truly even being acknowledged. First has to be acknowledged, and then what do we do about it? And so it saddens me. Looking at a lot of this research that I've done just in the past few weeks, it's disheartening because I'm just one person in a large ocean, right? A very deep ocean. And so speaking to these issues, sometimes it's difficult for me to articulate because it just seems that I can't speak to the right people. The only people I get to speak to are my students who are ready to learn, you know, hopefully ready to learn. But I can speak from my own experience. Trying to learn and being hungry is not easy. And as I stated, I'm able to sort of get some buy-in from my students, because once they realize I'm not just a white female, that I'm one of them, and I grew up around here and I can relate to a lot of the same challenges that they face. I can be empathetic and sympathetic at the same time. Sometimes it allows me that avenue to actually get to them. And I think that's where my main focus has to remain, because these issues are so much bigger than I am.
Thank you. Brother Kevin Cuff.
Thank you. When I think about this question, something that Blaise pointed out comes to mind, and that is the fact that in many cases, policymakers, and sometimes even school administrators and teachers, for some reason, they fail to acknowledge that there is even a problem. That obviously is pretty problematic. They're unwilling to really admit that the system, the education system in the US, as we know it, is failing very badly. I think we can all agree that the education system, based on what we've seen with regard to the pandemic, we can all agree that the system is failing. And failing in particular to not only educate youth of color, but the general population. So this failure to acknowledge that there's a problem, obviously that's a major concern. Another concern that comes to mind is the fact that the system, the education system as we know it, was never really designed to accommodate the needs of kids of color. And for that matter, it wasn't even designed for the modern student of any color. As we all know, the current education system is based on a model that was developed nearly 200 years ago, 2 centuries ago, during the height of the Industrial Revolution. And at that time, it had a particular purpose in mind, and that was mainly to train a new type of laborer to deal with the industrial manufacturing that was occurring. So it seems to me as if, given that, we have to reimagine what the education system in the future will look like, and we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we're actually trying to have the students learn? What do we expect as an outcome of the?
Wow. Ooh, man, tough. Dr. Martinez?
Yeah, so when I look at these questions, I'm concerned about before K, what's happening to the child at birth up through TK. The primary educator of that child is the parent or parents. And, you know, there's sometimes a thought that when kids come to us at kindergarten, they're all at ground zero, clean slate. And that's not the case. There's learning that needs to go on and teaching that needs to go on before that. So K through 12 educators always feel they're in a constant catch-up mode with many of our students. And what makes our country so unique is we have so many different dynamics of populations that we're addressing, from newcomers to first generation to going back to Revolutionary War generational families. What the needs are in the state of California and skills that are needed may not be the same in some of the other states. And just it's an ever evolving situation. And when I zoomed down to the last question, I never heard of the fourth industrial revolution. I've never heard of that. I always felt it was an evolving industrial revolution. We have an evolving technical revolution, so on and so forth. So what the pandemic has really exposed schools is that divide is for real, with the underrepresented minority students or the socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and trying to pivot into 100% distance learning, with them not having the capacity and the tools needed to access their learning from remote situations. That just added another layer. The socialization impact of, I don't use the term soft skills. I call them elastic skills. There's nothing soft about being the soft skills. You have to be elastic and pivot and giving those students the capacity. But if they're in environments where they are not feeling there's a firm foundation under their feet, that's where this helplessness and hopelessness comes into play with their education. So these are really loaded questions, and it's really hard to peel the onion and figure out exactly what are the symptoms versus what are the actual triggers and the pieces that you really need to dissect. So I'll just end by saying this: it's there's a lot to attack this, because to me it is something. There's a lot of challenges. It's very multi-layered that's out there. But when it comes down to me, brass tacks, when you're dealing with a child, it starts day one as far as what they're learning and their environment is prior to them coming to us as kindergartners.
Thank you. Renee.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has been stated, and that's one of the benefits of hearing it all first. But just real quick to go back to what Kevin was stating, I think it reminds me of, I heard the former chancellor of New York City Schools, Richard Carranza, talking about this idea of Jeffersonian model, right? And our educational system is actually doing what it was designed to do, right? And it's working very well at what it was designed to do, right? So the idea that there is a need, right, for basically a revolution in how we do school, right? Because under the Jeffersonian model, we're getting, we're designed to create the inequities that have come into fruition for forever, right? And this proverbial academic or opportunity gap that has existed forever, right? So just to add a couple of things, I think within that context, we continue to reinforce this kind of colonial relationship, right? Where we label students, right? From ELD, ELL, just continued attack on critical race theory, right? I view as a concern, right? Of course, here in Arizona, I can speak from the lens of Arizona, the continued teacher shortage. And within that shortage, the lack of teachers of color and bilingual teachers. And then again, just to piggyback off of kind of this idea of its colonial relationship, right? The continued use of deficit models, right? That has led to students, minoritized youth, students of color, maybe having a dysfunctional relationship to school, but not to learning, right? So how do we continue to look at systemically how we do school? How can we better serve the youth that are in front of us, right? Another thing that's concerning here in Arizona is the current year funding model, right? So tying it back to policy, right? From paycheck to paycheck, if you will. A district doesn't, it's based on current year funding, right? Based on that current enrollment is how it's funded. And that just puts a big uncertainty for districts. And then discipline data continues to be disproportionate discipline data, right? I know there's a book, Ending Zero Tolerance by Professor Black. And he just highlights the idea that, one suspension in ninth grade doubles the likelihood of a student dropping out. 50% of people that are unemployed in this book tells us that are unemployed, or 50% of unemployed did not complete high school, and then 80% of people who are incarcerated did not complete high school, right? So just really highlighting that school to prison pipeline, and how in a lot of ways we continue to perpetuate that, right? We've been looking at data here in our current district, and it's the data unfortunately still shows that we've been talking about our African-American youth way overrepresented in out of school suspensions, and what are we going to do about it, right? To look at it from a glass half full perspective, at least we're having the conversation and we're naming it and we're saying there's a problem. So that's it for now.
Well, I'm really gratified that we are able to have this discussion and really name some things, right, that we see as impediment to the success of many students, right? Now, the next question now is like talking about what do we think are some of the solutions to address some of those issues, right? So we could talk about problems, but it's important to at least have some ideas of what we think we should do to kind of solve some of these issues that we may have. And I would like to start off with Dr. Brownlee again, please.
So I think about a couple things, and this is kind of going to be based on my personal experience. When I was listening to Renee was talking about suspension rate. When I was in high school, I was suspended from school almost a total of 40 days. It's on my transcript, which I have. And so I graduated high school out of spite, just to make them mad that I wasn't going to go anywhere. But one of the things I realized is that I don't think they see me as a human being, right? They didn't understand that suspending me would impact generational, right? And so one of the things I think all teachers should be required to do is spend time in the communities that you're teaching. No longer that you can drive into the school, teach, and then go back. You need to actually be boots on the ground. Matter of fact, this type of theory, funds of knowledge, comes out of U of A. And so I think that's something that has to be done. You got to spend time in the community and understand the parents and understand the students and understand the issues that they face every single day, right? To better understand that when you suspend a student out of school, what is going to happen when they're outside of the school, right? And the data shows us, like Renee was citing, that unemployment rate, the percentages of you going to prison are increased, so on and so forth. So I think it starts with that, is that I have to spend time in that community. I mean, it's just a basic business model. If I'm going to sell a product, I got to understand the people that I'm serving in that community. Number one. Number two, all pre-service teachers need to take anti-racist courses. and ethnic studies courses to learn the vernacular and the historical aspect. So like, for instance, when I teach about the history of education in my class, I don't use that traditional Eurocentric pathway. I tell them that there's a different pathway that was for African Americans. There was a different pathway for indigenous people, Indian boarding schools, the history of historical Black colleges and universities. And so these are things that I use to try to increase their awareness of the historical oppression of those particular underrepresented minority students. I taught 5 years at Metro Tech High School. And when I took the job there, I spent time in that community, right? Because I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia. So when I was growing up, there was a binary. It was either Black or white. And you had a couple, biracial students at the school. But when I came to Phoenix, I spent time understanding the indigenous population. I spent time understanding my Latinx brothers and sisters so I can make my curriculum culturally relevant. But I knew teachers, they lived in Mesa, they lived in Gilbert, they lived in Goodyear, they lived in Buckeye, they drove in, they taught from 8 to 5, they got in their cars and they left. And they didn't have any skin in the game, right, within those communities. And so how can you effectively reach students if you don't know who they are, right? If you don't know where they come from, if you don't know the employment rate, if you don't understand the entrapments, or on top of that, it's not always a deficit perspective, also to understand the joy in that community, to understand their cultural holidays and things of that nature. So you can participate in that and also be considered to be one with the community and not as an outsider. Within a couple of years, I was one with the community. And I understood the entrapments I understood why they did not like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, right? Oh, okay, that's why you don't like him. I understand what DACA meant. I understand what Proposition 202 meant. Like, I understood what those things meant and those policies impact those communities. And so you're not going to learn that just from a book. You're not going to learn that from just being a master of your content. You got to learn that and be boots on the ground and understand the students that you're teaching. So no more of this, you coming in and teaching and taking resources out of this school to go spend in the communities where you live. No, you need to be rooted in the community that you're teaching. If you don't want to be part of this community, then go teach somewhere else.
Oh, wow. That's deep. That's really nice. So we're going to kind of reverse it as far. I know Rene went the last time, but this time he's next. Because I'm looking at you on my screen and you just next to Brother Lewis.
All right. Yeah. Wow, a lot of things stated, right? So just kind of, I guess, building off of that, what was just said, the idea of the grow your own model, right? I know it's been talked about. I know there's certain communities around the nation that are really taking hold to this kind of grow your own model to address the teacher shortage and to address the retention, right? So many times, especially in districts with the most needs, right? The teacher retention rate is horrendous, right? Within 3 years, there's turnover, right? I've worked at, when I was at the middle school last year, there would be kids coming, from the high school, from Carl Hayden, they'd walk over to Isaac Middle School wanting to say hello to their teachers that they used to have, and they're no longer there, right? So the grow your own model as a possible solution, right? And then, embracing and really promoting and teacher training and teacher ed programs, really committed to a culturally responsive model, right? I think that's certainly a solution. And then just really within that, tapping in and really reinforcing the idea that how do we have education, right, in school be more than just transactional, right? Especially with our kids that struggle more, right? And currently struggle more, right? It's got to matter more than, hey, you do this and you're going to get an A. You do this, you study for this test and this is your grade. It's got to be more than just transactional, right? It's got to be the idea of who are you working for today, right? Who are you carrying on your back? How do we as teachers, how do we teach, bring it every day like lives depend on it, right? How do we tap into the ancestral wealth, the navigational wealth, the community wealth, the cultural wealth? How do we bring that into the academy, right? And to bringing it back to what Dr. Collingwood was demonstrating, like that's life and death stuff, right? Education, earned income, more education, life expectancy, is longer, right? And when we really just bring it like it is life and death, I think we would all bring our best every day, right? And our best from one day to the next can vary based on how we are, right? In a given moment. But I think we would bring our best every day if we really come from the lens that we're going to teach today like lives depend on it, because they do, right? So I just think offering those pathways and those frameworks and keeping it at the top, right? Keep the conversations and the programming around that, I think gives us a good start to begin to address a lot of these inequities that have existed, for so long.
Great. So a couple of things real quick. I'm looking at the time, and I'm amazed that time went by so fast. But I need to hear everyone's voices. So keep that in mind as you continue to give your responses, right? Ms. Cross?
So I'm just going to keep this short just because it is from my own perspective. And what I know is that the buy-in has to be there on all levels. The buy-in first and foremost from my students, and then from my administrators, and then on up the ladder, right up the administrative ladder, all the way up to the legislators. But a bigger thing is that with this buy-in, it really starts at the ground level. I saw, I believe it was someone in the chat posted about teachers' boots on the ground. And I really appreciate that, because whenever I hear educators say, I'm 18 years in the classroom, I'm 2 years in the class, I'm like, thank you for your service, because we truly are on a mission. We should be on a mission, and whether we bring 100% or not, it's really up to that classroom teacher. And I think, unfortunately, I can recognize a lot of the comments are being made about teacher preparation courses. I don't know that I learned my craft in anything came from school. I'd already been teaching 8 years, and I was in locked facilities and high population of Native American students, Hispanic students, and Black students. And so having that exposure, working with that high-risk population before I ever went to college to become a teacher, I think it sort of gives me a different perspective on what's important. Yes, math is important. Yes, STEM is important, but being human first, that's what I teach the first several days, right? Let's be humans first. Let's make sure that we're all on the same page here. And the best way that I'm able to move that along and get that momentum going so that authentic learning can actually take place in the classroom is helping my students build a growth mindset. Carol Dweck, she's sort of the guru on this topic, and I'm sure you've heard it mentioned before, but it works in all areas of anyone's life. But when we apply it specifically to our classroom and we show these students that, it doesn't matter where you come from, how much money you make, how many cars you have in your garage, whether you're living with a parent or not, right? A lot of the families that I work with, it's a blended family. Maybe there are multiple families living in the same household, or maybe they're being raised by a foster parent or a grandparent. And so all of these things have to be at least acknowledged and, hey, it's all right. Let's move forward. Let's do this. And so for me, it's really keeping it on the ground level.
Great. Kevin Cuff.
Yeah, it's great to hear some of the things that were mentioned just in the last few minutes. It's very heartening to when I realize that so many people are sort of thinking in a similar manner, and that mainly has to do with their understanding that the system is broken and it requires some fixing. Unfortunately, in order to implement some of the things that have been mentioned, it requires funding, because we're already asking teachers to do so much just in terms of the content that they're forced to present to students. Having them do other activities that enable them to sort of address and accommodate the needs and the cultures and languages of students, that will require more support, financial support to some extent. Unfortunately, and I hope I'm not going to sound too cynical, we won't be able to generate that funding until we're able to demonstrate to the powers that be that somehow these changes that we're recommending benefit them as well. So that's a reality that I think we have to face, that you know, policies that are aimed at solving some of these problems have to be benefiting a broader sort of population, not necessarily the populations that we're working with. If that's not the case, then the funding will be short-lived. It'll exist for a short period of time, and then it will disappear. And we've seen that over the many decades in education.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Martinez.
Yeah, some great things have been said, and you know, I totally agree with what Louis said. If you were to ask our teachers, you know, I tell them, you got into education because it's your calling, it's not your career. You have to be ingrained in the community that we're working with. It's that comes with what you're going to be doing as an educator, whether you're a teacher, you're a custodian, you are up in the front office, what have you. It's the deal. And I think in California, the other thing they will tell you is that I think California has way too many standards that are out there that we're supposed to teach to our students. I think there's some relative ones that need to be done, but there's a vast majority that we cover and spend way too much time on. But I also think we have untapped tools and resources that are out there. It's very important to bring in people from the community that have walked the halls and walked the same sidewalks as our kids are walking, and letting them know what are the steps and the accessibility and their success stories, and share that. There's only so much I could share with them, but if they can relate to someone who has had those same experiences, that goes a long way. And it's also educating the parents as well. As I mentioned, we have a lot of first generation college bound students. The parents don't have an understanding of what that navigation and that journey looks like. So providing opportunities for them to be taught how it works. You put something on a Saturday. You know, I'm someone of the mindset, this is not a Monday through Friday job. This is something we need to set up times for families to be able to access them. And if they need childcare, we provide the childcare. We provide the food for them, whatever it's going to take to bring them onto the campus to help them better understand what's out there for them, really lowers their anxiety and whatever perceived barriers they may see that are out there. So those are some of the things that just come to mind for that second question.
That's great. So one thing that I want to add just shortly is that I think it's crucially important that when we deal with underrepresented minority students, that we go back, right? We kind of think about the historical context in which they were raised, right? And I think we kind of talk about education in the sense like it just happened, it started 10 years ago, right? People have been, especially minority students, have been underrepresented in education forever. And I think sometimes we need to go back and really address those issues. What I mean by that, like have students understand who came before them, right? Have them understand that their great-grandparents didn't have a chance to read and write, right? Have them really understand that the impact of what we do in the classroom right now has a major impact on the rest of their lives. So I don't think we talk about those things enough with students, and I think that's an important thing that we set talk about, which means for us, we need to be more educated on the historical context of education. And I think that's very important as we move forward. Now I'm looking at my clock again now. I'm trying to see, my clock is just moving much faster than it usually move, I think. Because I'm looking at it and we have like less than 15 minutes left. I'm like, no. But anyhow, I want to leave some time for the audience to participate. But before we do that, I think I just want to, the last question I really want to talk about, we might have to leave the fourth one alone, is like, and we're going to be very brief on this, right? What should teaching and learning in the 21st century look like? Because that's like the key to everything moving forward. You know what I mean? So let's get some brief tidbits of what that will look like. And I want to ask Dr. Dave to jump on this one.
Yeah, you know, I'm not in the classroom, so my lens is completely different to everyone on the panel, right? My lens is from a public-private, partnership that needs to take place. And Dr. Martinez kind of, touched on that briefly about doing stuff on Saturdays, bringing in food, reducing the barrier for students to learn new skills. Because to me, I think there's a huge gap in not giving students the relevant skills for them to be able to really succeed, in what we call the fourth industrial revolution or the digital age. There's a huge gap because of all of the different standards that are there that these students need to adhere to, at least go through in order to get out of high school. If we could continue, and B, I'm just talking about also some of the stuff that you've done with that program and bringing in different people of color to be able to share their ideas back to the students. And so the students could actually see that, someone like me who studied computer science, who work in a technology space, who work in an entrepreneurial space, they could actually be that. They could actually practice those skills. They could actually identify. When we started the 5 Saturdays program 9 years ago, the mindset was, how do we change, those individuals based on what they get to see? How do we bring people, the private people from the private sectors, come onto the campuses and demonstrate what it's like to work in software, what it's like to work in this industry, what it's like to run a business. And so those are the things I think that's really relevant and it's really missing, because it's great that teachers could teach their subject matters, but at the end of the day, right, when they get to the end of high school and it's time to get off that diving board and jump into the pool, you got to have a skill that you could use. Even if you go to college, you still need to have a skill that you can make money, because oftentimes when the communities that we're coming from, we don't have enough money to pay for college. We end up with huge debts, of taking on loans to be able to do that. But I'm saying that we have to build a stronger public-private partnership where we allow individuals from the community to bring those relevant skills that those students could translate and use them readily, while they're in high school or, when they leave high school. It's really important. To me, technology is a thing that I rely on, and I believe it's a path. We know it's a path forward in everything that we do, but I think students need to learn that skill and to be able to thrive in that space. I mean, someone who's 16 years old could learn how to build a website and things like that, make quite a bit of money doing that, or learn different AI skills in dealing with data. So that's my context. Mm-hmm. Is how do we build up public-private relationships so that we could start to mirror to those students what it's like if you're a person of color or woman to be able to thrive in this modern society that we do have.
That was really nice. So we are close to getting to wrap up already, and I feel cheated because this topic is such a important thing that needs to be discussed. And I'm just happy we have the forum right now to talk about it. But one thing I think that, and I think Dr. Dave kind of hit on it a little bit, is that what we are not doing enough is teaching critical thinking skills, right? And I think I could talk about mathematics because that's what I deal with, is that we are in a space now where students could find the solution to any one of the traditional mathematical problems that we give now, right? And we could continue to fight that, or we could ask different questions, right? We could ask students, instead of solving a problem, you come up with a question. What question do you have, right? Because that tells me that you will have to really be thinking critically about something, you know what I mean? Instead of just trying to solve the square root of some number, right? Let's kind of talk about what, and furthermore, instead of giving questions like, solve this problem, you solve it. What you do, you talk about, can you explain to someone, can you write a story about how will you go about doing this kind of problem, and why, and what's the purpose of this type of problem, and apply that to some real situation, right? So we can create a new set of critical thinking skills that could be leveraged as we continue to move on out of K-12 education. I think that's a real issue that we need to address. Also, I'm also right now working on as a data science fellow at the U of A. So I do a lot of work with students analyzing data and writing up stories about data and really using technology to really analyze some big stuff, right? Some real world stuff. I just did some work on students looking at the effect on COVID and the opioid crisis, right? Those two big things happened together, and we talk about what was happening as far as what we found out is that when the COVID crisis went under lockdown, then we saw that less opioid people addicted were going to the hospital, right? Which makes sense because even though they were using opioids, they were still concerned about COVID. So instead of going to the hospital, they refused to go to the hospital. So students analyzed that data and they were amazed that, man, they were able to do great things just using data science and stuff like that. So I mean, I hate to do this, but I think we got to wrap up right now. And I want to leave some time. We've got about 10 minutes or so for me to hear from people who in the audience who have questions and want to interact with us. So everything is open up right now. Don't be shy.
I was just going to say, as a teacher of 17 years and having had a really unhealthy relationship with my calling, it destroyed my life. And at the expense of a great many teachers. And I'm part of groups where it's just right and left, the burnout. We want to help. We want to make it better. We are growing. We are loving these kids. We are learning. We're in the communities, and it comes at such a heavy cost. So how do we get those voices at the table so we can have solutions without that? It's like being in an abusive relationship at a certain point where, you know, our job took over and we're not allowed to say no. And so how do we bring teachers to the table, to the solutions? Because there's all these ideas and leadership, and it's fantastic. And I'm loving it. But how do you bring those voices?
Well, that's $1 million question. But I think it starts with something like this, right? Having these conversations, because right now we have administrators on this panel who of course were former teachers, right? And it's interesting to find out from them, like, how does that work, right? How much influence can teachers have in decision making at the school? You know, that'd be a very interesting question to ask an administrator like Renee.
Yeah, to your point, Dr. Collingwood, I think, you know, I wish we had the magic dust, but I think if there's any chance for us to begin to address some of these concerns, like, teachers have to be at the table, right? They are a stakeholder. Their voices have to be heard. They have to be at the table. This year, those of you that are in the classroom more than ever, right? It's been an extremely challenging year, right? Burnout is real. Probably the most difficult part of the pandemic was coming back in January, right? And with all the illness with students, staff, you know, no prep period if you're a secondary teacher, right? Always covering for a colleague. No, I mean, it's just been extremely difficult. And I think that's real. The burnout is real. And we have to acknowledge that, right? That struggle. And as we come up with new ways to better address some of these problems, teachers must be at the table. So I think that's a point well taken. And teachers, you know, you all are in the trenches, right? So you're the most number one. All the research shows, right? You have the number one impact on teaching or learning on achievement is the classroom teacher. So.
Thank you.
You guys had a great example about like the Saturday events and all of that. Do teachers have the ability to, like you talked about childcare, offering it to your families? Do you offer it to your teachers? Has that thought come across? Because often we overlook the teachers' families. Or do they have an event already? You're asking them to forego their child's soccer game to go to this. And is that acknowledged? Is that, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was the one that brought that up. So it's not an every Saturday situation, and nor do we have our teachers at every of these Saturday situations, but we do provide the childcare for them. I'm in a unique situation. When I started out at Berkeley College High School, all but one teacher did not have any children. Then they started having children, they became young parents and so forth. So I was very sensitive to that. What my point was is that when we put on Saturday events, normally it's going to be me and maybe someone from the college that is speaking to our families and providing interpretation services and, you know, utilizing college students to provide some of those opportunities to provide childcare. Where I ask our teachers to get involved is that, as was mentioned, is we carve out time once a month for teachers to speak about the struggles that they're seeing and address their mental health. And even so far as this year in creating the master schedule, making sure I have teachers that are paired up that have same conference periods so they can dialogue with each other and support one another and basically be a duo in doing that. So it's very much so also addressing what the teacher needs are and just understanding that everybody's dealing with what the challenge is at varying levels, but it's just we're going to give it our best shot as to how we can support our families. So that's where my response was coming from.
Jody, if I could just speak from a teacher's perspective, I know I'm in a new district. This is my first year at Bisbee High School. Previously, I was in Douglas, which both communities are walking distance to the Mexican border. So some of the challenges that I hear my colleagues bring up over and over, we'll call it a rant session for lack of a better word. I felt like I didn't want to be a part of those. I wanted to try to do something that would help instead of just having these rant sessions. And so I sort of volunteered myself as the teacher advocate. And when people would come to me and they would feel safe enough, you know, if you could bring this to their attention on my behalf, I would be so very happy. And I think over my years, I've learned how to advocate for myself very appropriately and professionally. But at this point this year, I'm not just advocating for myself anymore. And it really is about bringing attention to some of these issues that you speak of, you know, the long hours, maybe the issues that are just common that teachers bring up. And some of you have already spoken on these. It was before COVID, it was an issue, but now compounding it with everything else, we do need to protect our students' mental health, but teachers' mental health, administrators' mental health, parents' mental health. And so if you look at some of the staggering data that goes with mental health, I just think advocacy is the best thing. And that's why I'm here today.
I just want to remind us of time, and maybe we have 2 more minutes before we have to wrap, before we go into our next session.
Okay. Again, we have to do this again because a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed. Because the reality is teachers don't often have time to really discuss stuff, right? We are busy in our classroom doing our stuff. So we don't have a lot of time to have that kind of conversation in a forum like this. So I really appreciate that, and especially with some people who I've known for many, many years. And I'm glad to hear their voices as far as this is concerned. But if we understand what those slides were saying a little while ago, is that if we don't do the job of educating our students for the 21st century, we will be in a world of hurt, right? Because the whole system is getting more complicated, right? As far as what we expect from students 10 years from now, right? Because I've been teaching long enough where I have students now who finish college and all that stuff, and they reflect back on what was beneficial to them. And we are never really surveying students who have graduated, right? To ask them, okay, Was it necessary for me to teach this stuff in my math class? Did that really help you? What was the most important thing that really helped you, right? What type of stuff? And I think this idea of communicating with students, and I'll tell you what, for me, I think what's missing too, especially for minority students, is this idea of looking at critical race theory and how that impact education in the 21st century, right? What that really means for students and moving forward. So this was really a great session. I know we're out of time, and I really appreciate everyone who joined us, and it was really beautiful. I really enjoyed that, and hopefully Dr. Dave welcome me back a different time to do some work. I'm not sure if he will, but you know.
Hey, look, I am so appreciative of Dr. Collingwood and Lois and Kevin, Blaise, Renee, Dr. Martinez. I'm really so appreciative of you giving up your time and energy to be here today. I know I try to do this once a year. Maybe I need to do it more frequently than once a year, where I bring a panel of teachers to talk about their agility experience in education. And so maybe we may do it twice a year. I don't know. But yeah, very much. Thank you so much.
Time for my video.